Hello everybody, Ketchi1383 with Ketchi Gaming, covering a very special video today. One thing I've been doing since I've started my channel is to watch other gaming YouTubers. Since then, I have attempted to integrate aspects of different users into my own. I've had some mixed results. At this point, I am on winter break for school, and I left Amazon for so many different reasons. I decided to take a foray into something related to gaming, but not a review of a game. This came about after watching one YouTuber that, at least to me on the surface level, was pointing out imagery and themes. Personally, this is purely subjective, a good deal of the time, but it can be obvious at others. I do not want to go down a road where I come up with a subject, then stretch it out, even when there is overwhelming evidence that shows I'm wrong. Like a video on Majora's Mask where a YouTuber had a theory about the game. Never mind the gross misuse of the word theory, but the instruction manual, guide, and even the producers said he was wrong. This particular YouTuber still doubled down and then tripled down on Link being dead. On top of that, he chose the 5 stages of grief as a theme for the game. Never mind that was falsified, but the cliche use of the stages made me think he was trying to sound profane and deep. On top of that, the 5 stages have long since been falsified, and even disavowed by the very person who came up with the concept. And for one last point, it should be hypothesis, not theory. This is not a dig at this particular YouTuber, it was just the example that stands out the most to me when I think of someone trying to sound smart, and let's face it, he will probably never see it or care if he does. With that being said, I wanted to go over game design in the long term. By that I mean what effects game designs have on players in the long run. This takes on multiple forms, from hardware to the very basics of gameplay. An example of how hardware can affect game design in the long run would be the Nintendo 64 and the Wii U. Although the 64 was a more powerful system, the use of cartridges limited what the 64 could do. The Wii U, with its tablet, is a disaster waiting to happen if it breaks and you cannot get a replacement or repair it, considering how integrated many of the games are with the tablet. I could go on about other poor choices about hardware, such as everything with the Xbox One launch, particularly the Kinect and Don Merrick's stupid comment.
And fortunately, we have a product for people who aren't able to get some form of connectivity. It's called Xbox 360.
Right. So stick with 360. That's your message if you don't, like it?
If you have zero access to the internet, that is an offline device. I mean, seriously, when I read the blogs and thought about who's really the most impacted, there was a person who said, hey, I'm on a nuclear sub.
Right.
And I don't even know what it means to be on a nuclear sub, but I've got to imagine that it's not easy to get an internet connection.
I digress. I want to focus on the games themselves. The most obvious being games as a service or live services. I will touch on them a bit, but I want to start with gaming during the mid to late 2000s. The Xbox 360 was released, and with it, the introduction of achievements. Achievements were a brilliant idea to expand upon a game, adding length to the playtime as well as a means to show off to others what you have done. It was so influential that Steam and Sony copied the idea. This is where I want to address how game design can affect games in the long run. For example, Gears of War has an achievement, seriously, ... Now, this is where I would say game design has a negative long-term effect on a game. The achievement entails getting 10,000 kills in versus matches. It feels like they assumed the game would be so popular and fun, people would have no problem getting the achievement. It was rather obvious that it was not. Don't get me wrong, the first Gears is a great game, but not great enough to grind away hours in multiplayer. The worst part is they did it again with Gears of War Ultimate Edition, and this is far worse since there was going to be a second game, then compounded when the Gear series went into a decline after the third game, making this exceptionally hard to obtain. Just watch the Completionist video on this. It took forever, and he was bored out of his mind getting that many kills. In my opinion, they made an achievement that failed to increase the enjoyment of the game and turned it into a slog, completely failing to take into account players that would play the game way past its height. Then there are the sequels, with an even higher kill count, and with rumors of them making new versions of them. It feels like a gross overestimation of how willing people are to play their games. Yes, there have been people who have, but for me personally, I took one look at it and was turned off from ever trying to earn this achievement. Let me try to get my point across with a few games. Let's start out with Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition. This game has 29 playable characters, Legend Mode, or Campaign if you will, Free Mode, Challenge Mode, Adventure Mode, a Fairy Manager, achievements that are built into the game, and a gallery. The campaign has 32 maps. Each character has a max level of 255. On top of that, every character has multiple weapons that also need to be maxed out. There is the challenge mode, but I never touched that. Then there is the adventure mode. Originally, there was only one map, that of the NES Legend of Zelda, with 120 areas. The Definitive Edition added 8 more maps. Not all of them have 120 areas. Each area has a battle that has to be completed, and in some cases, multiple times. Then there are the fairies. You can collect multiple fairies, level them up, and then start all over again, sort of like prestiging from other games, in order to get more powerful forms of fairies. On top of it all, there is a new Game Plus mode, meaning you have to do the whole thing over. Now, with this ocean of content, what exactly is the problem? Well, the problem is the pure grind that this all entails. It was fun at first, then the pure amount of repetition just to get a character to a level to be able to complete some of the battles was just a slog. I never reached 255 with any character. I did not finish the first map. To me, it feels like they thought about quantity over quality and failed to take into account how long anyone would be willing to play the game. They planned for the long-term life of the game, they just planned way more than what I would consider reasonable. I love the Legend of Zelda series, and this game was a bit of a love letter to that, with a storyline including all of the games in some shape or form. The pure daunting slog of making any real progress killed my enjoyment for the game. Now, let's move on to Sea of Thieves. This game is amazing. Sailing the open seas, fighting skeleton ships, giant sharks, and finding treasure. It started out with me making progress at a steady pace. Then I hit rank 50 with the 3 main factions and rank 30 for the Reapers. The game became a drag, and gaining any rank came to a crawl. The voyages got longer and longer, to the point it would take 6+ hours to complete any voyage. On top of that, the rewards do not reflect the time spent in the game. To compound it, most of the treasure I would find along the way would be worth more than what I was getting from any part of the voyage combined. It feels like they only had a little bit of content, which they did when it was released, and they added more. Most of the tasks are just repeats of lower tier voyages. It felt like they're trying to stretch out what they do have to buy time so they can add more or to encourage players to come back. For me, it feels more like work. Especially after you unlock Pirate Legend and find out how much money it takes to buy most of the clothing equipment, weapons, and ship parts. It's over 8 million gold for a single item, and there are multiple items at the same price point. This, in turn, is part of why I stopped playing on a regular basis. Like I said, it feels like they're trying to stretch out the content they do have to last longer, resulting in some very slow gameplay and low rewards. It fails to take players' time into account when they decided on the rewards. Sea of Thieves is a game that planned on being around for a long time. It is a live service game after all. It just fails to focus on the short-term rewards for players. The last game I want to go over that fails to take long-term game design into account, or I should say games, in this case, that being Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. In particular, the raid dens. The raid dens are a carryover from Sword and Shield. The dens in Sword and Shield were not that well designed. The raids in Scarlet and Violet are not that much different. They are not exactly the same, but similar enough to share some of the same problems. You can definitely tell they were designed to be played by multiple people, which is where the problem arises. These dens are often very unbalanced, to the detriment of the players, at least when you get to the higher tier dens, that being 5 stars and up. In some cases, the dens are extremely difficult, even with 3 other players. It's even worse with AI-controlled Pokemon, with some of them being weak against the type of Pokemon you are fighting. The AI is slightly better in Scarlet and Violet, but most of the time they are not nearly strong enough to help with some of the dens that are 5 stars and almost completely useless on 6-star dens and up. So if you do not have an online account or no one comes to help you, some dens are out of the reach of players. In the case of some 7-star Pokemon, it took a very specific Pokemon that was built in one way in order to beat it, including a great deal of items to raise its stats. It's not feasible to have a very specific Pokemon for every raid. There are some that are favored that seem to do well, but they're not going to be able to cover all the dens. I mean, it's further compounded by the weird amount of inconsistency amongst the dens as well, with some of them just doing outrageous amounts of damage, and then when I do the exact same Pokemon again, it doesn't do nearly as much. How does designing a game around the long term affect this game? Well, in the future, if others play the game, there will be no players, or very few, to help fight Pokemon in dens, and that already happens. And the AI-controlled Pokemon are not nearly good enough to beat harder dens, making it exceptionally difficult, if not impossible. There are more games I could go over where long-term design affects the gameplay to the point where playing the game is no longer enjoyable. MMOs definitely go into this territory. After all, they need players to keep paying in some way to earn money and pay for everything needed to keep the game going. I went over games that fail to respect the player's time. Gears of War has an achievement that would take forever to get, even when the game was at its height. Hyrule Warriors, on the other hand, has a definite end, except for free mode, but it is such a slog to get through. Just because there's an ocean of content does not mean it's engaging or entertaining. Sea of Thieves takes what content it has and then stretches it out. It was entertaining, but then the voyages take 6 hours to complete, and the rewards don't align with the amount of time I spent getting them. As a result, I'm less inclined to play. Even when gathering footage for this video, I sailed around for an hour and 15 minutes looking for a skeleton ship. I did as I was about to stop, but there is a lot not going on to keep players engaged. If you made it this far into the video, thank you for watching and have a good one.